Hi.
Okay, hello guys. It has been a psycho couple of days in Texas. If you don't know, our temperatures dropped to a record low. Power was out for days. I was literally huddled up by our gas fireplace, like reading this book with a flashlight, but I got through it. I had a lot of free time to do so because we didn't have Wi-Fi or anything else. But I finally finished this book after owning it for so long, finally got to read it, and I have so many things to say. So yes, today we are talking about My Policeman by Bethan Roberts. Harry Styles was officially confirmed to be playing the lead role of Tom in the movie adaptation of this book. Y'all, I did not totally know what to expect going into this book. I knew that it was kind of placed in the 50s. I figured like, oh, it's gonna be fun, kind of vintagey vibes. And like it is, but this is a heavy read. This is a heart-wrenching story, an incredible book. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but at the same time, like, I'm very sad. I'm very heartbroken over here. It's rough. So yeah, I just wanna talk about it. Wanna go over the plot, the storyline, what happened, the characters, my thoughts on all of it. Let's just go. So yes, this book and this story is told in a very interesting way. Essentially, it is told through journal entries. It is a 5-part story told through journal entries of 2 different perspectives, one being from Marion Taylor / Burgess, who is Tom's wife. Tom is the policeman in the story, hence My Policeman. And the other being Patrick Hazelwood, who is Tom's male lover in the book. I knew that that was essentially what this story was about, and I was interested in it. I was like, okay, a little love triangle, like this is gonna be scandalous, this is gonna be fun. I mean, it was scandalous, but at the same time, this book really shows you how far like society has come, because it is set in a time when that was not even slightly okay. But yes, I'm getting ahead of myself. The book essentially opens up and it is Marion writing a journal or a letter, it's not really clear, basically addressed to Patrick. She's speaking to Patrick in the story. At this point, it is the 1990s, I think 1999, it's like late 90s, and Patrick has had multiple strokes. He is in a wheelchair, he needs to be taken care of, and he has now come to stay with Tom and Marion, and she is taking care of him. You can tell from the kind of beginning that Tom and Marion are married, that there is major tension between Tom and Patrick. Like, Tom wants nothing to do with Patrick. He just pretty much has left the house, isn't around, doesn't want to see him, and that Marion feels some sort of guilt or need to take care of Patrick, and that she wants to help him. Patrick has, because he's had a stroke, can't speak, can't move very well, he's struggling. So yes, you kind of get that in the beginning, and Marion kind of is starting to talk about and reflect and flash back on when she met Tom. So that's what's really interesting about the story, is it constantly flips back and forth between the present and the past and just different time periods and parts of the stories. It jumps around, but it does it in a way it's not confusing. Like, it makes it very interesting to read. It keeps you enthralled. It's not a super long book. It's like 350 pages. So there was no fluff in this book. It was constant, like, bam, 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 telling the story. Everything that was in there was like very necessary to read. But yeah, the book kind of starts out and Marion is flashing back on when she met Tom, and you know, that's in the 50s, kind of the mid 50s. This whole book is set in Brighton, in England. Tom is her friend Sylvie's brother, and she had a crush on him from a very young age, and she always, you know, was into him. And Sylvie kind of made comments like, oh, Tom's not like that. He's not one to marry. Get over it. It's never gonna happen. And the way that they kind of end up bonding is Tom is a swimmer. He swims in the ocean every single day, and Marion doesn't know how to swim. So they kind of make a comment that he should teach her how to swim, and then he goes off to fight in the war and comes back, and she ends up being like, yo, when are you gonna give me those swim lessons? So he starts giving her swim lessons in the sea like once a week, and things are moving very slowly. She is extremely into him. He's a very handsome man. it's so funny. He's blonde-haired and blue-eyed in this book, but I feel like his mannerisms and just the way he speaks and so many things about him really remind me of Harry Styles. Like, I know it's brown hair, green eyes, it's not the same physically, but they just, a lot of the features, like they talk about his back and like, I know it's really random, but I feel it's the way a lot of people refer to Harry Styles as well, and I think he's gonna be great to play this part. Just personally, like it was very easy for me to picture him saying these lines, doing these things. Yeah, so things are moving slow and she's kind of getting frustrated, like he's not making any physical moves on her really. Then at one point, several months into them hanging out, Tom mentions art to Marion. You know, what do you think of art? I've been getting more into art lately. I think it's just so amazing. Like, it's something I've never really thought about. At this point, he is now a policeman. He's like a policeman in training, which is a very like esteemed career at the time. It's very like sought after. Like, a woman wants to be with a policeman. So now it's like he's the full package. He's handsome, he's got a good career, like all this stuff. Like, now he's talking about art, like whatever. So yeah, he brings up art, and then she ends up getting introduced to his friend Patrick, who works at an art museum, and he kind of runs it as the curator of it. And you start to, like, as the reader, you're like, okay, something's going on here a little bit. It becomes obvious that he's hung out with Patrick a lot, and they're very friendly, and they have a, you know, when they all three hang out together, Patrick's like, should we go to the usual place? And it's like, okay, something's afoot here. It keeps going on, and then basically Mary and him keep going out, and she just gets very frustrated because she's like, what's going on here? She has become a school teacher at this point. She likes Tom. She loves Tom. She wants to marry him. Finally, they have like a date where she tries to get him to go to a bar, and he's just very like, wants to get out of there, is super weird and uncomfortable. She's like, what's wrong with you? They kiss, and then he's like, let's go somewhere private, and he ends up bringing her to Patrick's apartment, and he's out of town. And she's like, he has a key to the apartment. And she's like, why do you have a key? And he's like, oh, I come here all the time, you know, it's fine, like he would want us to be here. And they end up like going into the apartment, and Tom ends up like getting like very like throwing back a bunch of drinks, getting very drunk, and then he ends up getting really emotional and basically asking Marion to marry him, which they've kissed one time literally 10 minutes before that, but now let's get married. I mean, I guess it's the 50s, it's what you do. But yeah, that's kind of the end of part one. So it's funny because as you're reading me, I love a slow burn, I love a love story. I'm kind of like, you're flipping through and you're like, oh yeah, you're kind of like rooting for Marion and Tom. And you can tell that something's off. You can tell that she clearly has more feelings for him, but you're still like rooting for it. There's some tension. There's some moments where you're like, ooh, I'm into this. And then next comes Patrick's perspective, which is fascinating, and it's so easily flipped to where you're like, wow. The chemistry between Patrick and Tom is like a zillion times more intense, and they just work. They just go together. You immediately switch teams, switch sides. You're like, okay, I understand now. Patrick's entry is all from his personal journal, his personal diary. He never says Tom's name. He only refers to him as My Policeman. Essentially how he ended up meeting him was he was walking down the street, and some car was driving by and kind of knocked this old lady off her bike, and she's like, sir, go get the police for me, whatever. He runs to the police box, and Tom is in the police box, and that's where they kind of meet. He's immediately like struck by Tom, and ends up finding an excuse to go and see him again. And then he ends up, because he's interested in him, Patrick is a little older, by the way. Tom is like mid to early 20s, and Patrick is like 34. So Patrick ends up coming up with an excuse to see Tom. He ends up saying that he is putting together a project at the museum where he wants to draw ordinary people in ordinary occupations, such as like whatever, police officers, hairdressers, school teachers. Like, he wants to showcase them, draw them, showcase them, tell their story. It's a lie. Like, he's not actually planning to do it, but it's an excuse for him to invite Tom to the museum and invite him to draw pictures of him. And so every week they end up like meeting at the museum, and tension kind of like raises, and it's like he's into him, but he's like, at this time, like, it's not, this is very scandalous, like it's very like unspoken of, not heard of. So he's trying to like feel out the situation. He ends up, people at the museum get a little suspicious of him inviting a guy, so he ends up inviting him to his apartment to draw him. And of course, Tom gets very like, aren't you here to draw me? Like, why are we having drinks? Like, as soon as he starts to get the vibes. And basically after several times hanging out, Tom kind of lets on that he's interested, and like they go for it, and things happen, and it's a scary thing. Like, it should be an exciting, like fun thing to read, but like in this time, like that's a terrifying thing for them to be participating in, which you kind of learn. I felt like this book was a very like educational experience in a way. Like, it just shows how far we've come. Like, it gets more intense later on in the book with that aspect of it, but I mean, obviously, like in to a lot of people, like homosexuality is still like taboo, but we've come such a long way. Like, it's very mainstream in the media now, where at this time, like, it was just literally a crime in England. Like, you could get arrested if you were caught participating in these acts, and Tom is a cop. Like, this is a big deal. So yeah, you end up seeing Patrick's entire diary of him like meeting Marion for the first time, him thinking, you know, that they're not a great match, and like it's funny, but, and you see like Tom and his relationship, like they're truly in love, but like Tom is terrified. And Tom, you know, I found myself kind of hating Tom. I found Tom to kind of be an asshole in the beginning, and I was mad because Tom asks him, he's like, can you share? Like, can you share me? Like, how do you live your life this way? Like, how have you never married? Like, Patrick has never married, and he doesn't ever plan to, and he's like, I'm going to get married. Like, we have to stop this. Tries to stop it several times, but he can't. Like, you know, sparks are flying, and then finally there's like a big heated moment, and he's like, if you can share, like, if you can share me, like, tell me if you can share me, yes or no. And Patrick's like, if I have to, like, yes, I can. So that's now where he's asked Marion to marry him. They're married, and they have an arrangement, and Marion doesn't know what's going on, and Patrick ends up being his man of honor in his wedding, and it's a whole thing. So yeah, many things happen after that. Like, we now switch back to Marion's perspective. You're seeing present day that Patrick is not doing great, but at one point he's trying to speak, he keeps trying to speak, and he ends up being able to say like, where's Tom? Like, now in his whatever state, he wants to see Tom, and Marion's like, Tom's not here, I'm sorry. Clearly something has happened. Like, you're seeing from present day, in the 50s, him and Patrick were all happy, whatever. They were all 3 BFFs, and now it's like Tom can't even like stand the side of Patrick, won't come near him. So it's like, you know, at some point in the story, something happened. So yes, we end up seeing Tom and Marion's wedding. It's now her perspective again, and she's talking about whatever, being a school teacher and their wedding, and then their wedding night, you know, didn't quite go as planned. Her relations with Tom, once they happened, were just very short and quick and to the point. He wouldn't look at her, lights were off, as you can kind of expect, because he wasn't that into it. But I mean, they had a very civil relationship, and it's so hard. He was, you know, every week he's going and he's seeing Patrick, like every Saturday. They come up with some like reason why they have to spend every Saturday together, and then they start like every other Wednesday hanging out together, and they end up taking a trip to Venice, and she starts to catch on. Her friend at the school kind of makes a comment about Patrick because she met him at the wedding, and it's like, don't you think he's, she used some French word for it, like comme ça, like I'm not really sure what that means, but essentially means like he's gay. And she's like, how dare you say that? That's awful. And of course she tries to confront Tom about it and is like, oh, you know, she said this, and he blows up, freaks out, and is like, how could you say that? I arrest those types of people every day. They're freaks, and blah, like just talking so badly and horribly about his own kind, because it's a terrifying thing to be considered that at this time. And whatever, long story short, she eventually figures it out. She puts all the pieces together. She knows what's going on. She's ripping apart their room, trying to find any sort of evidence of it. Tom is totally gaslighting the hell out of her, making her think that she's insane. It sucks. It sucks so bad because you just feel this situation sucks. Like, nobody is perfectly happy in this scenario. Obviously, like, I think Tom truly does care for Marion. Like, he, you know, in the way of like a great friend, I think he does care for her, but he's not in love with her in that way. Maybe he loves her, but he's not in love with her. And, you know, he's in love with Patrick and Patrick's in love with him, but they can't be together because Tom is too afraid of the consequences. And, you know, he's a police officer, and like his entire life would fall apart. And not only at this time is there just such a, like, such a taboo and scandal, and like it is unheard of to be gay, but like on top of that, there's just such an immense pressure at a young age to get married and start a family, especially if you're like a profession like a police officer. He mentions that like his commander or whatever at the police station was constantly like, when are you gonna make a policeman's wife? Like, that's just how these times were. And it's just so funny how much like time has changed now. I mean, at this point she mentions like if you're 23 and you haven't gotten married yet, people are like, oh, your time's up, you know, your eggs are dried up, you're off the market, sort of thing, which is just crazy. So yeah, I mean, I was angry with Tom most of this book because I'm like, why would you lead Marion on? Why would you make her think you loved her? Like, why, you know, you're over here with Patrick too, making him share you, and like all because you're too much of a coward to like admit who you are and all of that. But it's like, times have changed, and I quickly realized how serious the situation was whenever the big ultimate thing happened, which was once Marion kind of put all the pieces together, she ended up writing a letter to Patrick's boss anonymously saying that he is a sexual invert and has committed gross, obscene acts. So, yeah, the police show up at Patrick's house. He is fired. He's taken to jail for literally being gay. Like, I mean, this is nearly the 60s. It's like the late 50s in England, and people, I guess, could literally be arrested if they were found committing these acts, like thrown in jail. I mean, Patrick mentions it in his book that like his level of crime is like considered the same as like murder. And I'm like, that's wild. It's so mind-boggling that that was the thing. And that just goes to show you, like, there's a lot of people that were born around this time that are still, I mean, they're very old, but they're still alive. And that just shows you like how different our generations were. Like they were young, but living through these times where people could literally go to jail for this. And now it's like just a thing. Like, be with whoever you want to be with. Nobody cares. Like, it's legal to marry, you know, it's welcomed. And yeah, so Patrick's in jail. He you know, is writing in his diary from jail. Like, the second he gets taken, Tom refuses to visit him, leaves the police force, ends up joining, becoming a security guard, and he like never sees Patrick again because he's like, I cannot be associated with you. Like, not only can I not be associated with you just because the fact that it's now known that you're gay, like, I'm a police officer, like, absolutely not. And there's a whole court trial where evidence is released, and Patrick's journal is released, and Marion has to testify, and she at this point feels so incredibly guilty because she's the one that turned him in, and she completely is for him, is like, he would never do this. And the like juror or whatever, or the attorney, is reading the journal talking about how from the day that he first met Marion, and talking about My Policeman and his school teacher, and they look ridiculous together, and I have to smile because it's just so funny, and you know, she's not nearly as tall as him, and they would never work, like all these just horrible, humiliating things that Patrick obviously never meant for her to hear, and she's having to like deny them and be like, no, I don't know anything about that. She tries to go visit him in jail because Tom won't go, and Patrick's like, where's Tom? Like, where's whatever? Like, it's so freaking sad. It's so sad, and Tom spends a good amount of time in jail, and then he goes, I guess, and lives with his mom. There's kind of like a gap where you see like once he's gotten out of jail to the present, we don't really know what all's happened. We know Tom and Marion never had a kid, never happened for them. Their marriage slowly just kind of like comes undone whenever Tom tells her that Patrick was arrested because of, you know, his situation. She's like, I know, like I went, because once Tom found out, he never came home that night. He like went out and stayed out, and so she went to Patrick's apartment thinking that he would be there, and that's when his neighbors told her that he had been arrested. And so her and Tom have this big blowout where it's finally like everything's out in the open, like Tom admits it, and she's like, she tries to comfort him, and she's like, it's okay, Tom, like we can get past this, like we can start our marriage over. And he's like bawling, and he's like, do you not understand? I don't care about our marriage. Like I care about Patrick. I'm never gonna see him again. Like, it's awful, and I feel so bad for her, but it's like, I feel bad for everyone in this situation. Like, it's just a crappy situation, and it's so sad. So yeah, whatever, back to present times, and Marion is trying to, I guess, make up for the fact that she kind of ruined Patrick's life. That's why she's taking care of him. The doctor comes by and feels that, you know, Patrick's getting worse and worse. He doesn't think he's gonna make it very long. She tries to convince Tom to talk to him. She's like, you need to like do something, read to him. And he's like, I can't, like, I don't want to, like, she's like, he needs you. And he's like, he needed me years ago, like it's over. And she's like, please just like read this to him. Like, I need you to read this to him. And it's the journal, like it's the book, it's everything that she's written down, telling their story, telling what happened, telling how she knew, and how like she was the one that turned him in, and all this stuff. And yeah, so it's been known that like throughout their marriage has gone downhill, and they've spent vacations apart. But oh, I totally forgot to mention this. So whenever Tom found out that Patrick got arrested, she was like, Tom, don't worry, like you can get a new job. I'm never gonna leave you. Like, I'll stay with you. No one will ever find out about you. Which, like, this woman is a saint. Like, could never be me. She goes through this humiliating ordeal, finds out her husband is like not even in love with her, has been with another man this whole time. And to save his reputation, like, she agrees to stay with him knowing that he doesn't love her. It's so sad. But so yeah, like the whole rest of their marriage, like they vacation apart, they really barely talk, like they just have dinner together, watch TV for an hour, go their separate ways. You know, it's just a sham. It's not really love. So she tells him to read to him, and it's the book, the journal, and she kind of sees them, and he's in there like whatever, holding Patrick's hand, like reading to him this story. And she packs her bags and she leaves, and that's the end of the story. And she finally is like getting her own life. She's leaving because she knows that once Patrick finds out, or once both of them, I guess, whatever, Tom finds out that she's the one that turned Patrick in, he's not gonna want anything to do with her anyways. And honestly, like, it's about damn time she has her own life. She does what she wants. It's now 1999. Like, Tom's fine, he's an old man, she's an old woman, she's gonna go live her life, and she wants to go travel and vacation, and it's like, ah. So that's the way the story ends. These reviews on this channel have kind of just turned into like me reliving the whole book, but yeah, long story short, I loved it. It was a great story. It was incredibly well written. It was so interesting. It was unlike anything I've really read before. I finished it feeling more educated, feeling like I have more of an appreciation for how far we've come in this world. I'm very interested to see the movie. I'm waiting for all these Harry fans are so excited for this movie to come out, and like I'm excited too, but like this is gonna be a tearjerker. It's not gonna be some fun time. It's gonna be rough, but I think he'll play the part amazingly. We know he's very open with all aspects of himself and sexuality and all of that, and yeah, like I said, I just feel like to a T, the character reminds me so much of Harry, just in his personality and stuff. So interested to see that. I totally recommend reading this book. If you can, even though I just told you the entire plot line, I would still recommend reading it. I totally plan to read other stuff by this author. She has a couple other books. So yeah, that is it. I think I hit everything. If you guys have read this or you just generally have any thoughts, let me know in the comments down below. Yeah, I'm excited to get back to the Shadowhunter series now, just to have something a little bit lighter, because this, as I said, was great, but I'm not going to be like picking it up to reread it anytime soon, because it was a roller coaster of emotions. But yes, that is it. I'm done rambling. These videos get longer and longer. I will talk to you guys very soon.